Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. It's so wonderful to be amongst professional colleagues such as you all. So as I had mentioned, I did a presentation with relation to microaggressions in the workplace. So just to tell you a little bit about me quickly, is that I work with the advocacy group. I founded the company, and it's really based on, it was birthed out of the lament in the world around us. There's a lot of disunity. I think we can all agree that there's been a lot of tensions over the last few years when it comes to America. And so with the advocacy group, I'm like, there's a lot of communities whose voices are being muted right now. And I think we could do a better job at amplifying those voices, especially when it's sort of our career to make sure that we play as liaisons for the consumer and the consumer voice. So what voices are sort of being muted right now, and how can we be sure to amplify that? So that's how I sort of got into the advocacy group. We specifically hone in and focus on marginalized and underserved community groups. And so we do market research, but then we also do trainings. And so when we do our trainings, one of the topics that we often spend a good amount of time on is microaggressions in the workplace. So why is this important? Well, because we know that when it comes to the generations, these younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, we're not staying in our seat like other generations have. We aren't staying at jobs just to be staying there, but we're actually rotating out of jobs, even sometimes after being there for less than a year. And that's not typical. But then there's also this increase. So retention is going down, but there's also this increase in conversation when it comes to inclusion and belonging. And so, what does understanding, like, what are some of the benefits of understanding belonging? Well, one, it fosters team unity. It helps make more efficiency when it comes to conflict resolution. There's more safety for new ideas and creativity and innovation. And then, of course, if you're keeping your employees longer, they're able to increase bottom line, right? You have more continuity, you have more expertise. That's going to increase your bottom line. So then what are the barriers then to inclusion? Well, one, there's psychological safety. There is this thing called tokenism, and that's a whole nother conversation for another day. And then there's also microaggressions. One thing that we've heard from, I've done a lot of research and trying to understand, like, why are people of marginalized community groups leaving their workplace? And oftentimes it's because they're experiencing things like microaggressions, like tokenism, or that lack of psychological safety. So when it comes to microaggressions, does anybody know what microaggressions are? I'm sure that some of you all do, but just for the sake of offering a quick definition, it's a subtle, often unintentional comment or action that conveys prejudice, a stereotype, typically towards a marginalized group. I like to think about microaggressions as a mosquito bite. I heard this and it was brilliant, and it stuck with me because I think it's important to understand that everybody has experienced a microaggression at some point or another. You could have experienced a microaggression. It's not just about your ethnicity. It's not just about your gender, but maybe it's because of a health situation that you're in. Maybe it is you have a child who might be that might have a handicap or some sort, or a disability, or it could be a variety of different reasons. But all of us have experienced a microaggression of some sort. But there is some people, like a mosquito bite, that get bit more than others. There are some people that might get bit once or twice, but then you have some people who are constantly being bit, and then they just boil up into a rage. And so trying to navigate through that can be really difficult, especially when it's happening in the workplace. So you might say something like, "Hey, so where are you from?" And you might think that's a really interesting question. What's wrong with me asking you where you're from? But if there's somebody else who's asked you, "Where are you from?" And oh my gosh, and they're touching your hair and saying, "Your hair is so this," and then somebody else is commenting on the color of your skin, or somebody else is commenting on your accent. By the time you get to that last person, it's almost like, we might say, "You're dancing on my last nerve." Like, you don't know, you might just be that one person that ended up on that last nerve. And so what we did was we actually talked to some of our very own colleagues in the industry and asked them about the microaggressions that they experienced in the workplace. And they had a lot of things to say. Some of those things included, it can feel like, an undercut. It can feel like you're being micromanaged or overlooked. They've heard things said like, "Oh, you speak really articulate for a Black person." There's a variety of different things that are said and done. One woman spoke about when she, before she wore a hijab, that, she had all kinds of privileges, but as soon as she started to wear a hijab, all those privileges seemed to have gone away. And so she questioned so much, okay, so when it comes to my work, now I'm being questioned constantly about my work, or I'm being really micromanaged, or I'm not able to lead as many studies as I used to now that I'm wearing the hijab. Is it because of what I'm wearing, or is it because of something that I've actually done? And so those are just some ways that microaggressions can show up in the workplace, even amongst our peers. And so, and then one other one that I wanted to say this for the end, but I'll position it here. And I want to leave this question with you in the end. But one thing that we've also heard when it comes to people of color in the market research world is, I'm only called upon when they need Black research, or they don't want me to actually help with the discussion guide, or they don't actually want me to help when it comes to the actual research design, but they only want me to moderate, and they leave me out of the entire process. And so that also shows up as a microaggression. And so these are just some ways that microaggressions show up in the workplace. And finally, I'll just bring this one last thing to you all. We wanted to know if, we wanted to understand if microaggressions show up for everyone the same. Like, so does a microaggression look the same for a person of Jewish descent as it looks for a woman? Does a microaggression look the same for someone who's transgender versus someone who has a disability? And so we had a few learnings that came out of that, and I'll just really quickly just mention the three things that sort of came from that. One is that microaggressions are indirect and difficult to pinpoint, but the emotional navigation of it can impact work dynamics and productivity. One of our respondents directly said, it's draining because you spend so much of your time measuring your words, measuring your tone, and watching your energy. And so we have this, written description of what a job is or what your working role is. But for some communities who are getting those mosquito bites all the time, they also have to do the added job of, all right, make sure I don't say it like this, or make sure I don't sound like that, or make sure I don't wear this, or make sure you're watching your energy, things that come naturally to them culturally or because of who they are, but they have to water it down because they have to navigate or avoid microaggressions in the workplace. Another thing that we also found out is that no, not all microaggressions are perceived as equal. For example, ageism, we think is oftentimes sort of not considered as big of a marginalized group, or not as big of a microaggression as others are. And then finally, we learned that there are some marginalized groups that do have to speak up louder than others, because some groups say, oh, well, they'll speak up for themselves. They've got it taken care of. We don't need to say anything for them. So that's microaggressions. That's how it shows up in the workplace. And then when it comes to what our jobs can be, that looks like, when we see a microaggression, it looks like speaking up. When we observe one, speak up if we've actually committed one, and all of us have. I've committed one, Kai's committed one, Frankie's committed. We all at some point have committed a microaggression. But when it's pointed out to us, listen versus getting defensive. Listen and try to understand how we can fix it. And yeah. So I realize I'm at time. I'm sorry I ran over, but that's the bit about microaggressions. And the question I want to leave with you is definitely, how can you help mitigate some of the microaggressions that exist in the workplace?